From 245 Trioxin Studios, this is Learning to be Liminal.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you so much for being here. I'm your host, Jared Howell, and this is the first ever episode of Learning to be Liminal. I'm so glad you're here with us. I just wanted to hop in before the interview and give you a proper welcome and kind of let you know what this show is in case you missed the intro episode I posted. I'm sure all of you did because I didn't announce it anywhere. It's just there. But this show is kind of for me, and I'm inviting you along for the ride. This is a selfish ride. It is maybe an audio journal of sorts, maybe a selfish way for me to talk to cool people, but it's about me exploring the line between skepticism and belief. I am a professional magician. We have a long storied past of skepticism and debunking and defrauding people. On the other side, I'm a professional tarot and palm reader. So I'm a little bit woo-woo myself, and learning to read tarot and palms after becoming a magician changed my life. It opened me up to things and reignited my love for the paranormal, supernatural, the spiritual, and all of those fun things. And yeah, it's been a weird journey. It's been a wild journey, and I'm so glad you're here. I'll shut up now. Let's get to the interview with Courtney Block, the author of the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology and Researching the Paranormal. All right. Hey, everybody. We are here with my friend and librarian / author, Courtney Block, the author of the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology and Researching the Paranormal, and an upcoming banger, Inside the World's Haunted Libraries, which I'm actually really excited about. I was watching your talk. You live streamed your talk at Jeffersonville Public Library here in Southern Indiana. And
Yes.
I kind of grew up in that building with my grandma. We would go there all the time. So it was cool to see you give a talk there and also tell a spooky story about it. So I'm really hyped.
Thanks. I am hyped too. I'm hyped to be here. I'm hyped for this journey that you're starting here with doing this. And yeah, that's immediately my brain is like already going a million places just based on what you said about the memories that you have of libraries and like that particular building. And I'm excited to see what we'll get
Yeah. So
into.
I'm going to back way up before we get into haunted libraries. We'll probably kind of end on that note. But so I know you're a librarian. When did the paranormal enter your world? Is that like early on? Like we haven't really talked about your paranormal origin story yet. So I'm curious to see like how you got into this field and how Courtney becomes an author and all that fun stuff. So can you give us a brief overview of like how you got into this?
Yes, I can. The paranormal has always been a fixture in my life. Probably it's a similar origin story for so many of us. Um, I've always read spooky books. One of the earliest books that I have like this memory of reading was a book about the haunted United Kingdom. And it talked about like the hauntings at the Tower of London and the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. And I just couldn't consume enough spooky stories. And of course, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was a favorite of mine, Goosebumps. And I think a lot of it was also really informed by the openness of discussions of the paranormal in my family, especially with like my mom and my grandma, actually both grandmas. And yeah, I haven't, unlike some others though, it wasn't set off because of any particular incident or experience that I had. It was just always being that kid who liked to read the weirdest, spookiest stuff she could find.
I
Yeah, I
muted
can hear you.
myself on accident. So, classic Zoom call. So as I've been on this journey, I have been unlocking like new memories and then like seeing things where I'm like, where did I first see this? And my introduction to the paranormal, as I told it, I recorded like a short intro episode that's just me talking to kind of set the stage for this. I mentioned my mom had recorded a David Copperfield special called Unknown Forces, which was his like spooky. He does a spirit cabinet routine, which is what the Victorian spiritualists, like the stage mediums, would do. And that's like one of my intros. But the other thing that I forgot about was, and I spent like all day Googling this yesterday. So I found it, but it was the my elementary school library had Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown, like the whole set. And I would read the Alien Encounters one all the time. And so I had like a vivid image of like that page with the illustration of the Men in Black and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
it was kind of fun to like see how much books play a role in people getting into this stuff. And yeah, even to a point like I felt like I remember thinking I was weird as a kid because I was when the Men in Black movie came out, I was like, but they're like bad guys. Like I
Yeah.
didn't like it was just weird to me. So uh,
Yeah. That's cool. You were like, "Hey, wait a minute. These are not the Men in Black that I remember from the Time Life stories." Um, yeah, I have that same experience with, especially scary stories to tell in the dark, just the iconic art that is in those and just being not ever really being scared by any of it, just being like, "This is amazing. I want more." Just, all the spooky stories that I could
that's
get.
awesome. So do you ever I feel like kids my age that were reading that when I first discovered scary stories to tell in the dark were kind of scared of it. So are you pretty brave as a person? Do you get scared on investigations or like doing any of the stuff you do with Boo 812 or any of the overnight like kind of like paranormal convention stuff you do or anything like that?
This is such a fascinating question, and my mind is going a million places with it. That, um, I think in some ways in my life, yeah, there's a lot of things that I'm afraid of, but, the paranormal isn't one of them, and so in that context, in, the investigations that we go on and the places that we go to, um, no, I don't usually feel, um, scared. There's always a little subtext of maybe like a little bit of trepidation that's kind of rooted in like being scared, um, that I think is just normal because you're in this, sort of environment where these strange things have happened, and so like there's always like a little bit, but it's more. I think it's more thrilling, and maybe even thrilling isn't the right word. I talk a lot about. I've been actually musing about this question, kind of a question related to the one that you just asked for a while about why the paranormal feels so familiar to me and why it feels so nostalgic and why it actually often feels quite cozy and comforting um, versus, other completely non frightening scenarios in life. Like, I don't know, going to the grocery.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I think it's, I mean, we can, maybe work our way into this. But I think it's because, um, yeah, I think maybe it's just because of always having an interest in the paranormal. And so it's always felt like a familiar kind of topic, but more so, I think, going back to how I first started answering this, where I was like, yeah, sure, I'm scared of a lot of things. I have pretty bad anxiety. And I think that the paranormal in a way for me feels really familiar because my anxiety makes me feel not really entirely there a lot. And what is what is a ghost or what is a ghostly thing other than something that's not really here? And so it feels so intimately familiar to me. And it's actually something that I remind myself when I'm having like a really intense anxiety day or the anxiety brain sort of goes on its little journeys and spirals that it goes on, and I tell myself often like to calm myself down. I'm just like, you know what, it's okay because the ghosts are there when you're not here. And I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, it definitely I think it makes some sense. I think it's interesting. Actually, I had another thought, sorry. Do you have any kind of religious background? I'm gonna start asking this question to people that aren't afraid of the paranormal versus are, because
Yeah.
I have a strong
Yeah.
religious background, and it took me probably until,
Yeah.
like, this year or last year before I wasn't afraid of the paranormal anymore.
Oh, I love this. I love this question. It's also interesting because it's something I've been thinking about recently as well. Um, and I had no idea what you were going to ask me, but yeah, I was raised Catholic, and so it's always been. I don't necessarily practice it anymore, but even saying that isn't quite authentic because when I travel, I still throw in, like a saint, like a card, like in my luggage. And I carry like, I think it's Saint Dymphna, the patron saint of anxiety. Like I keep her in like my little makeup and jewelry pouch when I travel. And when I lose things, I'm just like, hey, Saint Anthony, like I gotta find this thing. Um, and I have a lot of uh yeah, I think that, so I was raised Catholic, yes. Um, and I think it does still inform a little bit of certainly like my spiritual worldview, but also yeah, like my supernatural worldview as well, a little bit.
That's interesting. So, I think Catholics are probably a little bit more open. I feel like there's a lot because I grew up Southern Baptist. There's a lot of not to, like, make this, like, all of a sudden super religious, but there's a lot of m what I would call magic in Catholicism,
Yeah,
and you can kinda trace that history of them interloping these practices, and that's where the saints kind of enter because we couldn't stop the heathens from doing this thing, so but that's really just kinda Saint Michael, so why don't they yeah, so there's a lot of overlap, and they're also way less likely to be like, "That's demons," right? Like, they're like, "That's not demons, get that girl to the mental health ward." I think there's just so much of that. It's so weird to me that the Southern, like, Baptist and, like, other sects of Christianity are more scared of that stuff. So it makes sense, and I also
yeah,
it's interesting because on my journey, like, the last time I was really scared, I didn't know who to talk to about it anymore, and I posted in the Strange Familiars Discord, and, Tim from Strange Familiars and brother Richard, if you listen to that podcast, both chimed in and encouraged me to pray to Saint Michael, and it worked. Uh, so I was never Catholic, but that's become part of my routine, and
yeah.
anytime I get a little overwhelmed or anything. So, it's kinda interesting how fluid we can be, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. I love that. Thanks for sharing that about yourself. Um, I think it's all a very fluid thing. I kind of take what resonates and leave the rest. And don't get me wrong, man, there's certain things that's why I don't necessarily call myself Catholic anymore. There's certain things that I really don't get down with. But you
Same.
know, but that the ritualistic aspect of, yeah, this notion of, at its very core, even if you want to take the religious connotation out of it, just at its core, this idea that there are like larger forces in this world that can influence the world around us, and this idea of, yeah, the magic that is inherent in ritual. I think it absolutely informs, like, that Catholic upbringing, um, really informs the way that I might engage in spiritual practices nowadays, or the way that I might still pray today. um, can often look a little ritualistic, and I still find um, a lot of comfort. There was actually a quote that one of my favorite authors, Ralph Waldo Emerson, said something to the effect of, "I like the silent church before the service better than any preaching." And there's still a lot of comfort that I feel from just like sitting in a church. Um, Not during any service or anything, just like sitting in there. I think it's a very nostalgic feeling. I think it's also connected to my practice of practice is maybe too formal of a word to talk about anything that I currently do, but I feel very strongly connected with my ancestors. I think if anything, I engage in like ancestor magic. That's what a lot of my kind of, prayer and practice is rooted in. And so I think it's also when I'm in that space, it's also because, my family was all Catholic too. So it feels a little magical.
Yeah, that's interesting. I all that stuff is new to me, so I'm fascinated by it because I haven't never done ancestor veneration, and my path is very nonlinear. Southern Baptist worship leader, youth minister kind of guy to atheist to agnostic to playing with everything. So I didn't really
Yeah.
discover that until I got into it is hard for me to talk about because I'm a bald white guy, but I got into Norse paganism for a second and not racist. I just want to clarify that to anyone listening, which is what a racist would say, but you'll just have to trust me. I reading about how they kind of did that as well, like historically. So I started to do it because of that. And then through other means, Catholicism, I realized they kind of do that as
Yeah.
well. And it's been
Absolutely.
crazy, like how comforting it is.
Yes. I love that. I think you put it better when I said I take what resonates and leave the rest. Um and I also really love I think something from Catholicism that that I enjoy with the saints and everything is the veneration of, women in a way through, sainthood, and through, the iconography of Mary. And I often feel much more connected, to the female figures in certainly in that faith system than any others. Um, but yeah, I think also too that, like, I'm glad that I was raised, religious. Um, Even though I wouldn't necessarily call myself a practicing anything really, because it made me open to just the topic and phenomenon of religion in general. And it's made me curious, like, about, the world and faith systems, and how it's also that curiosity has enabled me to see the similarities and the ways that some of them do intersect. Um, and I don't know. And also too, Catholicism is just real, it's real spooky, right? With like its, concepts of angels and miracles. And I don't know. I remember one of my grandmas had this book of people's personal experiences with angels. And I remember reading it as a little kid, and I was like, oh my God, this is so spooky. I love it.
That's interesting. So actually, I'm gonna put a pin in this because I want to come back to women in a second, in general.
Yeah.
But we got way off topic, which is one of my favorite things about talking to you. Is I think like the first time we actually hung out, I came to a Boo 812 like haunted tour last year, and we immediately, like, went off in the deep end talking about libraries, and then you had to be like, "Oh, hang on, it's my turn to talk in the tour." Like, we were off. So, I love just going off on tangents. So you're into spooky stuff, you're into all this.
Yeah.
When does the academic stuff come in for you?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So I it's kind of funny because I never pictured myself working in academia. I From very early on, like my very first official job was just a few weeks before I turned 15. I got a job as a page at the local public library. And I really just fell in love with public libraries and the ways that they create community and support community. And I was like, "Oh, you can, like, make a career out of this," you know? And, I only ever really just wanted to be a librarian. It didn't really matter to me, like, what form that took necessarily. I was at a public library after grad school, and just so happened that it wasn't an organization that I necessarily saw myself long term at, and so I had just been keeping my eyes open for, job postings, and I saw one at Indiana University Southeast for, a librarian, and I was like, "You know what? I never contemplated going into academia, but I know that I'm not happy where I'm at currently, and I have this like feeling that the next step is ready for me to take." And so that's how it happened, honestly. That's not a grand story. It's just
That's
how it
awesome,
happened.
though. So, I like just kinda going with the flow, like, doing what you want. When do you get, like, the urge to write an encyclopedia? Like, how does that happen? Because
Yeah. Um, I realized when I said that, I was like, okay, but that that still doesn't really like answer that question. Or yeah, how do you go from that to so what I really liked about IU Southeast is that it's a relatively small campus. And so I think like my academic experience is maybe a little different from others who were like at gigantic, research institutions. But the writing, my life as a writer began in December, like November, December 2018. I saw an email come through a listserv that I had subscribed to that was all about um, scholarship and publishing opportunities for libraries because um, librarians at IU are expected, they're faculty members, they're expected to publish and do all of that. And so I was, subscribing and paying attention to opportunities to do that, which was something I was really terrified of because it was new to me. And I saw an email come through in which the publisher of my first two books, Roman and Littlefield, they were accepting ideas for their next round of like research series, and that time period was um, like that end of 2018 was kind of rough for me. There was a lot of burnout, just professionally and personally. I had already been in academia for about 3 years, just over 3 years at that time. And I just remember seeing this email and thinking to myself, I had this idea to talk about, um, the history of paranormal research. And I just thought to myself that, you know, I should reply and do that because how amazing would it be to actually be able to write about that and have it be considered, work related as part of the scholarship that we're expected to do and engage in. And I sent the email really kind of flippantly, just thinking that someone on the other end would just think like that's pretty funny, like what a weirdo, whatever. Um, but then they emailed back and they were like, "Tell us more about this idea. Like, what do you mean?" Like, they were intrigued enough to say, "Tell us more." And that uh, flippant email that I sent eventually uh, morphed into a contract for the first book, Researching the Paranormal. And then that book and the relationship I built with my publisher morphed into an opportunity, an invitation to write a second book, the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology, um, which has then morphed into an invitation to write this third book.
That's awesome, and I love that because I don't remember if I did it when you were at the mediums, but I think I probably did during the theater show you saw. I like to end all my sets kind of gassing the audience up to just go do the thing. Everybody here has a big
Yeah,
aspiration, and you're not gonna get it unless you just try. So I love that's
yeah,
like my method is to flippantly do things and then immediately be like, "Oh shit, how am I gonna find enough people to interview on a podcast to keep this going for a long time?"
yes,
Which is what's happening now, but here we are. So I'm just going. I think
yeah,
that's just how we get started. So I love that too, which is also part of the naming convention for this. I feel like there's a lot of liminality there to just be like, "We'll figure it out. Let's just get stuck."
yeah. Oh man, I love how you put that. And absolutely, I feel the same way about when people ask me this question, like, how did your writing journey begin? Um, I feel similar to the way that you described, ending your shows, and because it's an opportunity for me to remind people, hey, just shoot your shot. Like I didn't think that anything would come of that. I was just not having a great season and was like, hey, I love ghosts and I know how to research things, and what if I combined them? And I just sent it out there, and then yeah, I had that moment where I was like, oh, now I've gotta write a book.
Yeah, and that's the fear moment is what I call it, where you're like, you've started and then you have the realization of, "Oh, this is gonna be I love this, but this is also a lot of work."
Yes. Oh my god, yes. I absolutely feel that. I get in the habit of, for each of my books, I have made it a habit to take pictures of my writing setups, like my various desks. Whether I write, sometimes I write here in this space in my office, at my house. Sometimes I write sitting out at my couch. Sometimes I'm at, the university writing. And I've made it a habit to take a picture of my various writing spaces, because even though sometimes I get really, maybe I'll get irritated because it's real cluttered and messy and chaotic, and or I'll get, kind of overwhelmed because of the intense time and energy and work that goes into creating the thing. But then every single time when the thing is done, there's always a little bit of sadness and a little bit of nostalgia for, like, oh, I missed it. I missed being in the thick of creating that
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. That's a thing that's hard to explain to people. There's this I don't talk about this often, but there's this it's not a documentary, it's a magic show. I think it's on Disney Plus called In and of Itself with this magician Derek Delgadio. And the whole show is kind of about it's about his life, but there's a big thread of like people define you by what you do. And uh he has this analogy where it's like a Russian roulette analogy where he's a guy that he's called the Rouletista, and he goes to a bar every night and he plays Russian roulette, and everybody gather around to see if he's gonna off himself. And he at the end, he wraps it up being like, "I'm the Rouletista. I get on stage every night, and I can't function without this, but it's killing me." And it resonated with me as a performer for so hard, but my girlfriend was like, "Why is he bitching? He gets to be on stage every night." And so, like, the disconnect, like, it's such a hard thing to talk about, but, like, I remember quitting music and being like, Fuck those guys. I don't wanna tour anymore. I'm over it. I hate everything." And then 2 years in, I was like, I was like a shell of myself, like, so depressed that I'm not out there doing the thing anymore that I hated when I was doing it, that it took everything I had in me. So, it's it's an interesting thing that, like, post nostalgic feeling. Sorry, I just took your thought and then put, like, a big negative energy around it, but
No, you didn't. You didn't at all. You didn't at all. Um, I really appreciate you, like, yeah, sharing that, and I think it also, yeah, that's it's just part of it. It's part of that process, and when you, yeah, when you said that thing about, like, I love this, but it's killing me. I mean, yeah, there's how that, how do I wanna put it? I think that's a great way of talking about the inherent payment that your creative product demands of you, um, for it to sort of be born into this world. Like, yeah, like it's gonna take something from you, and you just have to
Yeah,
pay it.
which I'm just gonna keep saying everything I say. I feel like, or it kind of ties back into the name because that itself is like a give and take, and you kind of always feel stuck in between. Can do this thing, it's gonna be a lot of work, or I cannot, but it's gonna be miserable. Um, all right, so let's get into some spooky stuff because this is supposed to be a paranormal adjacent podcast. So, you brought up your books, so I want to dive in. I picked up Researching the Paranormal, and I ordered it, and it's been taking a minute to get here. So realized last night I was like, I'm gonna buy the PDF too, and so I've been reading through that. And
You
one
do
of the
both,
things that I
man.
wanted to talk about that I thought you might find is a fascinating topic. So you mentioned in either the preface or the first chapter, you talk about, I'm gonna say this wrong probably, but is it Pythia, the oracle at Delphi? Yeah, and how
Yeah,
ancient Greek society used women as oracles. And then later in the book, you talk about spiritualism being very woman centric, which it was. And then it got me thinking about all the stuff I studied in Old Norse society, and there was a practice called Sather that was, like the women oracles, but it was specific to being a woman. So, Odin used it and was always kinda jided for it because it was a woman's thing to be an oracle, to be a seer. And it's interesting for me in this space exploring being a reader as a man because I mean, there's way more women readers than there are men. And it got me thinking last night about how, and I talked to Katie yesterday too. I interviewed Katie Gleasing, and we kind of touched on this, but it's interesting because I think empathy plays a strong role in psychic ability and ESP, and I've always been very empathetic and very, maybe middle of the road, but I've always felt very, I don't like it's a weird society now, so I don't know how to say this politically correct or if I'm even being politically incorrect, but feelings in my day growing up were feminine to have feelings, to be deep in your feelings. So I always felt that way. And for that, I always felt more comfortable hanging out with girls. Like a lot of my close friends in high school were girls. And a lot of the people that I really enjoyed talking to were girls. So, and that's still kind of the case now. I feel like I make better friends with women. So it's just an interesting thought. It's me identifying that as like a through line. What do you have any thoughts on that of why that's the case?
oh my god, yes, and my mind is just going a million miles a minute. I feel like when I chat with you, I feel like it always does, and that's, like, a good thing. Um, and I first of all, I think it's awesome that women have always been this, like, safe space, and I feel like I feel like that experience is one that many of us, even women, like, we like, "Yeah, we get what you're saying," you know? Um, yeah, there I think that there's so many different things that I'm thinking, but I agree with you. I think that there is an aspect of the emotional, is sort of in tune with your feelings, empathetic side of things does absolutely have a connection to the supernatural and the paranormal and the psychical, I absolutely think that it's totally connected. And, historically, that's always been, like you were saying, um, you know, a lot of those things have been very, heavily societally discouraged, in those sort of toxically masculine ways about like, like, oh, like, don't be in your feelings. That's not very like whatever, all those, awful parts of um so I think that in a way it's always been easier for women to occupy that role, to occupy that spiritual psychical role, because that those traits were never necessarily unsafe for us to engage in. And I think that they are connected. um, and I think there was something else that I was thinking. Oh, yes, especially when you get into the spiritualism era, I think that something fascinating that I think about is how the seance room offered this sort of performative opportunity for women to break out of these traditional patriarchal societal expectations of women and how you're supposed to behave as a woman and what is and isn't appropriate and proper for a woman to do. Um, and yeah, so it's also got me thinking about how I think it's there are many ways to be in between and to be liminal, but I also think that perhaps part of that is also because women have often occupied this liminal space of like I'm just thinking of that like iconic monologue in the Barbie movie where it's like, you have to be sensitive but don't be too sensitive and like, be assertive but don't be too assertive and it's just like what is this space that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, old society was just so bullshit in a lot of ways too. Like one of the things researching spiritualism that blew my mind was that to be an actress, you were considered like a public woman, which was just a semi nice way of saying prostitute or like sex work. Like
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
know, I mean, definitely. It's even crazy. I think the year spiritualism is discovered with like the Fox sisters is the same year, the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff like that in there where it's empowerment. I just found it fascinating that it seems to be that way. And even if you look at some of the old, like, uh, he's got like two D names. Is it Douglas Hume? Daniel?
Daniel
Yeah, yeah.
Douglas
So
Home. Yeah.
that guy, reading accounts of him, his story has a very loving kind of feminine undertone to it, like, him as a person seemed to. He was very loving, he didn't charge for his seances, he would just ask that you put him up for the night, and, he would accept gifts, which is also kind of a con man thing to do, but I do think that in a lot of aspects of him, I remember thinking that too, so it's just kind of interesting, and he's also one of the few that never really got the few male mediums that never really just got murdered by skeptics, like, he was never debunked, defrauded, he kinda died a mystery, and I
Wow.
don't know, it's just fascinating to me that I think that plays a big key, and it's also played a big part for me in doing the seance shows and doing magic because I'm always there are, like, 2 big things that I try and say every night I go out, which is do the thing you wanna do and just fucking love each other, which sounds corny, but
No, it's not
um,
corny.
but
Yeah.
it's interesting. And also, on the subject of researching the paranormal, because I guess, I'm not all the way through the book clearly, but the purpose of that book is to empower citizen science, which is a term that I hadn't heard until I read that, and when I did, I was like, "Yeah, that makes so much sense." So, what are some primary sources that you think are underutilized in paranormal research? Both for professionals and for citizens that are just practicing and on the hunt.
Yes. Oh my God. Okay. I mean, I've loved every question that you asked, but I'm also just like, ugh, I give me an opportunity to talk about research and resources, and because one of my biggest things, and I'm glad that the goal of that book came through to you, because yeah, part of writing that was to show not just the person in the academy, like the student, that hey, this topic is valid and your curiosity is valid, but to also show anybody, the general public, that hey, this information exists and you have the ability to access it, and you have a right to it too. Um, so yes, let me tell you about some of my favorite resources. I love the Chronicling America Historic American Newspapers database that is provided freely and openly through the Library of Congress. I tell everyone about that. Um, it's such an amazing newspaper database. It indexes newspapers in the United States from like, gosh, the late 1600s, early 1700s, all through up until about 1964. And it is such a gold mine of research, especially because in that era, like, I mean, my God, they printed everybody's business, all the details. I mean, we would consider most of it doxing nowadays. Um, but for the researchers, right, like you and me, or if you're doing research on, a location because, there's some weird things happening or whatever, you can get so much information about, the people who live there. Um, I think also that Sanborn fire insurance maps are really awesome resources, because you can find them for most cities. They were drawn to help with fire insurance purposes in the event that, something happened. But on them, you can see like details about how cities used to be laid out, and like buildings, like what used to be in this spot that isn't there now. And you could also, it was pretty common for address numbers to change over the years. Um, and so what used to be, you know, what might currently be a house or a business at 1813 whatever road, 100 years ago was 1113. And so if you can use that information to then search in the newspaper databases, because you've got the historical address, if you will. um, and then the internet archive is another freely accessible, all of these are freely accessible resources, but the internet archive is such an amazing tool to get entire I mean, gosh, just entire works, openly, freely and openly. I went to Half Price Books like a couple weeks ago, and there was this really awesome book about like dowsing and the history of dowsing, but it was, kind of expensive. And I was like, it was kind of dated, like from the 70s maybe. And I was like, I wonder if I can find this on the Internet Archive. And sure enough, it is. The book that was written about the Philip experiment, Conjuring Up Philip, is entirely freely accessible on Internet Archive. Um, yeah, so those are the 3 that come to mind, but I mean, I could keep talking, but I'll
No,
pause
that's
here.
awesome. The Internet Archive is one of my favorite things ever. Just for random stuff, I can tie this into the paranormal too, but earlier I was talking about like looking back at like how I got into spooky stuff. And one of the things that hit me early on was that I remember seeing a write up on the Phoenix Lights in Disney Adventure magazine. And I remember that, like, Timon and Pumbaa were on the front cover in, like, trench coats and, like, detective hats and a flashlight. It was, like, their Halloween issue, and I found that whole issue on just the some saint put all of, like, early '90s Disney Adventure magazine on. So, it was kind of fun to go back and see, like, that same exact photo of the Phoenix Lights that got me into it and also introduced me to the X-Files and all these fun things.
Yes.
So there's a ton of nostalgia on there too.
Oh my god, yes, thank you for bringing that up, because sometimes I get like a sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm like, I gotta remind people that all of these databases are include much more than just the paranormal. I'm always only ever really talking about them in the scope of the paranormal, but so yes, thank you for mentioning that. Um, but yeah, I mean, even for genealogy purposes, my God, like chronicling America, the databases, the newspaper database can be so valuable. Um, just general historical events, um, photos of people and events. I mean, it's just yeah, sheer sheer nostalgia.
Yeah, it's awesome. So, how do libraries fit into paranormal research since you're a librarian and there was a clear lack of mentioning libraries there?
Yeah. So, I think that I mentioned the first 3 because, they're accessible even from just, you can sit on your couch in your home. You don't even have to make your way physically to a library. But thank you for this opportunity to, yeah, remind people about, their libraries, in in a physical sense. So libraries tie in so many different ways. I mean, first of all, if you find a book, maybe you listen, to this podcast and you hear us talking about various books or whatever, and you want to track down a copy of it, go get it from your library. Save your money because, geez, Louise, especially nowadays. um, but just in general, get it from your local library, because not only are you supporting your libraries, which are continue have always needed support, but especially again in the need for support continues to grow and grow for libraries. So not only are you supporting your library, you're saving yourself money. You're also enabling perhaps the next person behind you. If a library decides to add a certain book to their collection, the next person behind you is going to find it. Um, Librarians can also help you do research. If you're just like, hey, I'm looking into the history of my house or the history of this, one building or this person that I heard about. Um, I mean, we are literal degreed information literacy folks. And so we can help you with that. And I don't get that question so much necessarily at the university library, but at the public library, people would come in and be like, "Man, some weird stuff is happening in my house. Can you help me dig into the history of it?" So we can do that, and God, there's just so many ways that libraries, like, can help. I'm also too like a lot of libraries have local history rooms and archives collections that you can also dig into if you're wanting to do historical research in that way as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I admittedly I didn't know all that about librarians and how research oriented you all were. I had one bad just one. It took one bad experience at a library and it wasn't even that bad. It was just a stupid experience. Probably like 2008, I went to the Jeffersonville Public Library to borrow a copy of World War Z, the zombie book by Max Brooks. And I found it in the nonfiction section, which is where it was put. And so when I returned it, I brought it back to them and I said, "Hey, just so you know, this was in the nonfiction section and it's like definitely fiction." And the lady looked at me and was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Unless you remember the zombie wars, I'm pretty sure that that's a fiction book." And that's like what cemented little old librarians as like just, somebody's grandma for me. But I didn't know how much like academic work you guys do until I kind of met you, and
Yeah.
it got me thinking about how underutilized it is. And also how kind of like creepy libraries are. So I I definitely want to talk about your new book that's going to come out. But Jeffersonville Public Library for me, I mentioned it earlier, but that was like every weekend I'd stay with one of my grandparents. And so when I'd stay with my grandma that lived in Indiana, we would go to the Jeff Library. We would rent movies in the basement. And then at the time, the basement also had like kind of an art gallery. So all the rooms had different like framed paintings in them, which my grandma liked because she was a painter. And sometimes there would be like book and movie sales in those rooms and stuff like that. So but I do remember just being creeped out by, like, the long hallway on the other side of the video store in the basement of that library, and I've always thought that they were kind of creepy, and they're also liminal in nature. I think there's a lot of even if you just take it at this one fact that, like, especially the Jeff Library is very much open to just, like, letting homeless people come hang out for the day. So which might turn people off, and if that turns you off, well, then fuck you. I'll say it meanly because, I mean, I don't mind and, like, I remember going, to the Indiana research room just last year, and there was a guy sitting in there just getting out of the cold, and I could tell he felt
Yeah.
uncomfortable that I was doing research in there, and I was like he started to get his things, and I was like, "Dude, you're fine. You just hang out,
Yeah.
do your thing." So, there's literal transient people there, and then they're also just kind of in between places. I mean, you've got so much foot traffic,
Yeah.
you've got so much history, they're also usually big storied buildings, I think. So, is that kind of what played into inspiring you to write this work? Or, like, how did you decide you wanted to talk about haunted libraries? Is it just, like, a kind of a classic, "Let me mash up the 2 things I love," like, or
Yeah. Thanks for asking this. I am just taking in everything that you shared. Yeah.
sorry, I said a lot of
Yeah.
words.
First of all, no, no. No,
No, no.
that was
Yeah.
meant positively. Like, I love everything that you just shared, and I think that, I love that you have these memories other than that one weird, like, World War Z memory. I mean, good God. But I love that you have these memories, of the library and especially connected with your grandma, and I'm glad that you brought up, the fact that, yeah, this is the role that one of the roles that libraries play. There's not many hills that I will die on, but one of them is, and there's not many things that I wholeheartedly 100% believe in. And my answer to both of those are, like, libraries and the value and the importance of them. And, like, one of those hills that I'll die on is that they are there's no other place like them in society, and that's so needed and it's so necessary, and the library is often the place where people go when they don't know where to go. Um, hence, the, unhoused populations, absolutely. Um, being, just one of the many library patrons that, we serve. And yeah, I can, in my mind, when you were sharing that story, I'm absolutely going through, um, those, some unhoused folks that I, was familiar with or got to know in my history as, a librarian. Um, and yeah, I'm just kind of musing on that. But yes, so the idea for this book is, it started brewing when I was writing my second book, and really I describe this third book as my love letter to libraries and the ghosts within them. Um, because what I really wanted to do was capture the exceptional human experiences of librarians and library workers, um, across the world, uh, in terms of the strange experiences that they've had in their libraries. And so it was this desire to highlight library workers' voices primarily, to highlight these and to capture, like, in perpetuity. And I hope that doesn't sound egotistical, but, like, to capture, um, their lived experiences that are not recorded anywhere else, and to have this broader discussion about, um, what I have been thinking about for years now is, a bigger discussion about the inherent nature and qualities of a library that I think make them inherently, naturally haunting spaces, um, for so many reasons. One of them being, what you just talked about, the fact that they are places for everybody. They are places where people go when they don't know where else to go. They are places where, at least in the Western world, you cannot go anywhere and sit there all day without buying your right to be there. You know what I mean? Which is messed up. But libraries, you don't have to buy, your ability to just sit there all day if you need to or want to, and nobody's gonna bother you. And there's no place. Libraries are liminal entities because they're such a core part of our society. Like, everybody generically has good feelings about libraries, but there is nothing else like the library.
I love that. I love all of that. Because we're getting a little short on time, but what's your favorite? Can you share like one of your favorite stories from the book? Like, what's your favorite, like one of your favorite spooky stories? You don't have to give like the A stories away. Like maybe like a B tier story that's really good from your book to encourage everybody to go check it out when it finally releases.
Man, that's that's a great question, because it's so funny when you say that you don't have to release one of your A stories, because I there's all of them are like have such a special place in my heart. But I will tell you a really funny one. This was from a library in Australia, and I love that there were actually so many Australian librarians who had, like, tales to report to me. I was like, "This is great." Um, and there was one instance where, it was closing time, and there was an older lady that, staff had noticed multiple staff noticed had gone into the women's bathroom, and there's no exit from inside, the women's bathroom. And so they just, made note of it in the way that you make note of who's in the building and where when it's closing time, and you're reminding people and just, keeping track and whatnot. And so it's, getting closer and closer to closing time. And the lady hasn't emerged yet. And they're knocking on the door, and there's no response. And so finally they decide, well, we're, gonna go ahead and, like, get the key and open this up and check, because they kind of started getting worried. Maybe she had a medical emergency or something. And so they open the door. They open the door, and the bathroom is empty. And the part that really got me is that the librarian who reported this to me said that the only exit, the only way to get out of that bathroom is through the drain. And so we've just taken to calling her the drain lady. And that's how they refer to that experience, that ghostly moment. And I love that one. There's other examples of things like that libraries around the world reported, which is that very similar situation where it's closing time, and it's in all the stories. I think it's usually more than one person has noticed a patron is, they're somewhere in the library, and they're like, "Oh, they haven't come back yet." Usually it's a patron who is a regular. The drain lady, I don't think, was a regular. I think she was just a random. I don't think they'd seen her before. Um, but in a lot of the stories, it's a regular patron that they know their name. They've seen them before. They see them regularly, and they'll be like, "Oh, they haven't come out of the study room yet." And multiple people notice that they were still in there, and then they'll go back in, and that kind of makes me think of, like, the way that we can tend to haunt the world around us, like, maybe. And it reminds me too of, like, the meaningful the ways that libraries become meaningful spaces to people as well, and that we often have these positive memories. Um, so I don't know, like, maybe I don't know. Maybe those patrons that people saw at closing time were just, thinking like, "Oh, I've got to get to the library again tomorrow to continue, reading or studying or working on this project or whatever." Or maybe they just happened to be thinking how they had such a good time the other day at the library, or, whatever. Or maybe they were reading something they checked out of the library. And does that coincide with, like, the moment in which library workers are, like, closing the building, but they're like, "Hey, so and so is still here." I mean, I don't
No,
know.
it's interesting. So I worked at Half Price Books for a little while, and that would happen to us pretty frequently. I was a nighttime like book buyer, so I worked the like where you go to sell your books, and I just remember my manager Fred always was a very on top of closing. Like he would wander and make sure he knew where everybody was so that we could get out of there on time. And there were several times where it would be like some random person we'd never seen before would come in, go to the bathroom, and then we'd never see them again. And yeah, and I mean it's not beyond them sneaking past us, but I never thought about it until that story that I was like, "Oh wow." Cuz I could totally see myself hunting a half price books when I croak. Like I love the bookstore. Like if I'm bored or going insane in my apartment and need to get out, I will just go to every bookstore in the city. And most of the
Yeah.
time I don't even buy
Yep.
anything. I just wander around and I touch books and I
Yep.
feel books and I like check out things I like. So it's interesting. I can see that being a thing.
Yeah, and I think, oh man, I you're reminding me of this other one of my other theories about why I think libraries are inherently haunting spaces, and I think a lot of the same components can apply to bookstores, but libraries are. Let's consider the books themselves, right? I think I think, especially if you've ever been in a library after hours, or even just been on the floor by yourself, or um, I think you can totally feel like the energy of these books and whatever it is that you've created, whether it's a song, a painting, a book. The act of creation, I think, is a magical process that leaves behind some sort of, talking back circling back to the beginning, where it's like there's that energetic residue of the thing that it has demanded of the creator, right? And I think that you can feel that echoing. And so also with libraries, and in a way, like half price books, like by and large, a lot of those books are used. They've gone through their reader or readers and then ended up on the shelf. And library books, somebody checks them out and it spends time with that person, that patron who's read it, and maybe they forgot about it. Maybe it fell under the seat of their car for 6 months and then they randomly found it. Um, but they either love it, they hate it, they forget about it. But either way, that book lives with them for a period of time. And then it goes back on the shelf and the next person checks it out, who then, and that reader then like pours their energy to it, and the cycle continues and continues. And I think that um I don't know, I think that can sometimes account for the weird things that happen in libraries, but I also wonder too about the just I kind of wonder if like the drain the drain lady, or the people that you would, notice at half price who would seemingly disappear, like could they also have been characters in some of these books, that were kind of brought to life by, their the energetic imprint of their creator, but also all of the readers who have
I
consumed
love
them.
that. There's like a whole thing. I'm trying to remember the book, but somebody wrote a book about seeing fictional characters like in real life. Like I'll try and find the
I
title and put it in the show notes and also
Okay.
send it to you. But it's a
Yeah, please.
fascinating topic to like, I don't know, have that like Harvey moment where you look up and there's Bugs Bunny in real life and you're like, what the fuck's happening to me? Am I going nuts? And then it's nobody believes you. And I imagine there's a lot of those that nobody tells because they're for sure gonna make you seem like a nutter. But I love that. I don't wanna keep you too long, but I have 2 more kind of, maybe deep questions for you that I'm
Sure.
gonna try and ask everybody. But, you've been a paranormal researcher, you've been writing for many years now. What do you believe?
I love this question. Wow. That's this is something I have also been thinking about more and more, especially over the past couple of years. And I think that hmm, I think in terms of the paranormal, what I believe is that like it serves as a vehicle for us to have exceptional human experiences that make us think, just think about the world around us and our role in it, but also which often connect us to other people through those exceptional human experiences. Um, that's what I believe. I I wholeheartedly, and this might seem kind of weird as somebody who's written researching the paranormal and the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology, but I hope that we never get all of the answers. I hope that we never solve it. Um, I believe in the mystery of it all and the importance of that mystery. And I think just even contemplating, like if I woke up tomorrow and like the news was just like we solved it, like it being the paranormal or whatever, just feels like soul sucking, like just drains all the air out of me. But yeah, that's what I believe. I don't know
No,
if
that
that
makes a
made
lot of
sense.
sense. While you were
Okay.
saying that, I was thinking that if the show goes on for a while and I get a bunch of these answers, I'm gonna make a hall of fame of answers, and that's gonna be one in it because I love that. And I think so many people get focused on like what they believe in, especially like cryptid people, like cryptid heads, like, and I think they kind of lose sight of the meaning behind it all. And I think that's one thing too I talked with Katie about. I'm not sure when these are going to air in what order, but I love Katie in the fact that she's very much like a Scully type, but not outwardly so. She's she's there for the fun of it, and she's not gonna ruin the
Yeah.
fun of the moment, but then she's like, "No, I kinda rationalize my way out of everything," like, and it's fun to me that those people exist too, like, I don't know where I was going with that thought. I had a train, but then I started laughing thinking about it, but it's fun to see, like, everybody's take on this answer because for me, it's just about finding enough evidence to be comforted with the end, right? And I think that I've kinda got enough now to know there's something out there that's gonna comfort me, but I don't know what it is. I'm just here for the journey and all of that.
Yeah.
I lied, I said 2 questions. I have 3 now because there was one very specific that I wanted to ask you because it was in the foreword
Okay.
of your book, the researcher that I should have wrote her name down, that wrote the foreword for researching the paranormal. Just states as clean as day that ESP is real. And one of my favorite authors, Mitch Horowitz, also, I mean, he has a podcast called it's literally titled ESP is real. And what do you believe? Because I know we didn't even talk about this. There's so much to talk to you about, but you study the Rhine Lab, you've uncovered a love story there that's super interesting. We're going to have to talk about. There's all sorts of cool stuff, but you've been in the deep end of this academic research, and I mean, like, the deep end, guys, like, at the archives, looking at physical papers on parapsychology and ESP research and all this stuff. What do you think? Because I think the stats, like, I can see how the average person that's average at math doesn't grasp the value and the small statistics we have on just like Ryan's lab, but for me, it's pretty compelling.
Yeah. I believe that like I'm convinced of the existence and the verified the scientifically verified existence of the psychical, the weird, the paranormal, whatever you want to call it. Um I'm convinced. Now, I'm convinced that it exists. I don't know, and that's about as sort of far as I can. None of us really know like what it is or how exactly it happens. But I am convinced that we have shown the scientific community has shown that this is a reality of this world that weird things happen. Strange psychical things happen. I think it has been shown scientifically, and I think also sociologically, these these experiences, like eyewitness testimonies and personal experiences that can never inherently never be like clinically, scientifically, like stamp of approval. Um, that's important too. And I just find it I am I am wholly uninterested in being the person who like dismisses the millennia of human experience of things like, hauntings and ghost stories and, whatever with just like, well, we can't prove it. And so just dismissively sweep it to the side. I think I also believe that the paranormal is such an intimately like interconnected part of the human experience. Um, and yeah, sorry, I like kind of lost my train of thought. Oh yes, so I uh, some of the I know like some of the main arguments against uh the scientific study of, let's say, parapsychological related research is that the statistical the statistically significant results that they've gotten are often, not always, but often small. Like they exist. It's a statistically significant result, but maybe it's a little small. So then there people sometimes will dismiss it just because of that. And it's like, well, okay, but the statistics are sound and the statistics are there and like the math is correct and the study, there's nothing wrong with their methodology and you're just dismissing it because you're like, well, yeah, but it's a small result. That just always seems kind of weird to me. Um, but there's also this notion of the problem of replication, which is, I think, perhaps a an argument that has a little more like feet than that other sort of small statistically significant result. Because the goal, at least with scientific study, is the ability to have it replicated, right? But this is a huge discussion in throughout the history of the parapsychological study is that there's something uh, perhaps inherently non-conducive to the replication of these phenomena. Um, that does kind of make it difficult to, you know, prove its worth, I think, in the academic arena. But I think it has. I think it has proven its worth. um, I think that there will always be this tension about the worth of the pursuit in the scientific way because that tension was there at the very beginning. Like psychology as like this nascent field of study was coming up at the same time as psychical science and psychical research, and there were people who felt that like psychical studies were a natural subcomponent of psychology, and then there were diehards who were like, we're trying to like get people to take psychology serious. Like, get out of here with your, psychical stuff. Like, what are you doing? That tension was there from the beginning and it has never left. I don't think it'll ever leave, but I mean, I'm convinced that we have shown I mean, I'm not a parapsychologist, but I think that, I think they've shown
I
that
have
it
two
exists.
thoughts over everything you just said, and one leads into the next question. But real quick for listeners and you, I have this story I tell sometimes of seance shows I did last year where I was doing my magic thing and giving readings, and this girl was asking about her grandpa in general, and she didn't write this down. We hadn't talked about it, but I kept getting an image of a wooden table. And I said, "Does that mean anything to you?" And she said, "Yeah, my grandpa was a woodcrafter and he handmade a table." And then I felt overwhelmed with like gratitude, and I was like, "I think he's happy you're hanging on to it." But what if she sent me that thought? That was the thought I had, like talking about ESP, and I wonder how much of mediumship could be that. And then the other thought I had, which leads into the question, is I feel like a lot of the people that try and recreate the steps, though, are skeptics, and they don't want it to happen. So that argument translates to the other side too, because 'cause they're always like, "Well, the researchers wanna believe. They wanna believe, and because of that, of course, they're gonna find evidence." But the same's true if you don't wanna believe. You're gonna disprove everything and rationalize everything. And I think this is also where magicians have done more damage to research than anybody because they were so vicious about it, especially the Amazing Randy and his takedown on that lab, with Banachek. I can't remember the name of the lab, my brain's farting, but it's I'm trying to ask, like, I guess part of one of my goals, which seems lofty, and I'm hesitant to say it out loud, even starting this, is to bridge that gap between magicians and research because I'm convinced that magicians know more about deception than any researcher will ever know. And I was talking to a parapsychologist about Ted Sirios, and he had receipts for how hard Dr. Eisenbud worked to disprove Ted, and that actually made me comforted. And I think magicians have the wrong idea. I still think we could be helpful because there's a lot in that study where I'm like, I'd have to be there because I know researchers saying there's no way. And I'm like, there's way. Like we do it all the time. Like collusion is the easiest method. There are still people in it's so easy that people in audience will still be like, well, just everybody's in on it. And I'm like, except for you. You think I went that far to get 100 people in this theater to like bit you? Like and it seems crazy, but it's possible. There's so much we can do
Yeah.
to create those situations. So, I guess my question is that a gap that can still be bridged or is the damage done? Because there's not a lot of, like, psychical research still happening, and if so, how do you think people that are versed in deception could help psychical research if we wanted to? That's, like, a deep
Oh,
question.
yeah. No, it's a good question. I well, I do think that there is still a very good deal of um, parapsychological research being done. Um, I don't think, yeah, maybe I think it has shifted certainly from some of the early like theories and things that we're focused on, um, but I think it can. I mean, if it can't be completely bridged, I certainly think that progress can be made. Like that was how I felt like when you first asked that. Like I absolutely think it's worth it. It's a worthy endeavor. I do think progress can be made. Um and I think that it highlights the importance through like what you're doing with connecting with that researcher uh, and also the things that you're talking about. I think it's why it's important to have people on all sides of the sort of angle, if you will, not to use the word angle, but like I think um having people who like magicians who can see certain things that another person cannot is important to like have all of those perspectives at the table because I think this is a symptom of like any field of study. Like you get siloed, and if you only engage with people in your field of study, well, you're only ever going to see the things that you see in your field of study that is taught, that is believed, that is experienced, that so I think that yeah, I think it's worth it. I think progress can be made. I think progress has been made in general, like if you consider um the tension, like how tense like the beginnings of the yeah, I don't just the history of like psychical science gaining its footing and then how it's morphed into parapsychology nowadays. And it's still very much a struggle, but I definitely think progress has been made. So
Cool.
yeah.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, thanks for talking to me and coming on. I appreciate your time so much. Where can everybody find you on the web? Where can we buy your books? And when does your next book come out?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. This has been amazing. I am like super excited for your project and the places that you're gonna go with this. People can find me. I'm most active on Instagram at liminal.librarian. You can get my books through the library. That's what I'll urge people to that's how I'll urge people to get my book. Um my third book comes out in April of 2026. The pre-order link is available on with my publisher, Bloomsbury. So you can just Google, Bloomsbury, Courtney Block, and you can find all of my books. But you can also ask your library to purchase a copy for you. And yeah,
Awesome. Well, Courtney, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And everybody go
yeah,
follow
thanks.
Courtney on the socials and buy her books or ask your library. It helps everybody.
It does.